So yes, injustice is bad. No question about that. We can agree about that. But what is also bad is responding to it. We'd say with anger, with aversion, with hatred, but even deeper, responding to it with fear. And this is a very, not a very subtle form of self-obsession. When you're being subjected to injustice, and you're unable to live with that, this is because of, it's really a visible form of egotism and self-obsession. It's fear of being humiliated. One is still afraid of the experience of being humiliated, degraded, and so on. And that's because there is still that kind of karma, there is still that kind of upadana, emotional reactionariness, substantiation of that kind of experience, that level of experience. One still is unable to see it, to even recognize it. So the emotion flows reactionary, responsive, spontaneous, beyond the control or even awareness of the person experiencing humiliation. But when that has been observed long enough, naturally it becomes transcended, and then the attention is free. A humiliating experience happens. One is not concerned with oneself. One is not afraid. Because that level of upadana, that level of reactionariness has been transcended, and then this attention is free to look outward. There is no need for it to be restricted, to be conditioned. And instead of seeing one's own humiliation, one's able to see what? Cruelty, the cruelty of the other, the cruelty of the person subjecting one to humiliation. And this is how true compassion, this is how compassion naturally flows. It's not the kind of compassion that you know when you feel humiliated, when you are hurt by the cruelty of others, and then you say, but I will be compassionate to that person still. That doesn't work. That's not real. There's something about that kind of compassion that I would even find unhealthy. But the compassion that I feel the Buddha is talking about is that which arises because one is not hurt. One is not humiliated. One is just able to observe, to recognize the situation. Instead of one's humiliation, one is able to attend to the cruelty of others. And recognizing that this cruelty is anatta. This is just, it's happening because it's habitual. It's manifesting, arising through the existence of that other person. That it's not personal. It's just that this person is so far from Nibbana, so far from the path that they can't see or control their own behaviors. That much crude, that much gross is their existence. Very much similar to animals. And that begets compassion. Did you see how much far from the path, how much far from Nibbana that other person is? And you see that they will suffer because of that cruelty and other forms of crude, gross feelings, emotions and behaviors. They will suffer not because there is some kind of karma registrar sitting up there taking note of all our behaviors and, promising retribution or anything like that. They will suffer because these things have natural consequences, because they're habitual. When you behave on the basis of karma, you're only reinforcing it. You're giving it a push forward, and so on. That's how the suffering will happen later. And that begets compassion. It's the compassion that arises because you'd wish that person to go beyond that. It's not about you. It's not you're being humiliated, but you choose to be compassionate still. You're not in that equation at all when you observe the cruelty of others, even when it's directed towards you. When you're not that being hurt, when you have transcended that kind of reactionary feelings, then you can just observe that cruelty of the other person and how they will have negative ramifications for that person. And you just recognize the whole situation, how far they are from the path. And that begets compassion. You would wish otherwise for that person. And you would wish for their liberation. It's not about you anymore. You're not there. And this really kind of revolutionizes our perspective regarding injustice. And this is I think one of the most prominent social issues at present, especially in Western societies. Social justice. That Buddhist view really revolutionizes our perspective regarding this issue. But yes, of course, social injustice is bad, is wrong, and there is nothing wrong with engaging oneself in trying to remedy its ramifications and also do something about its causes. There is nothing wrong with that. But to think of the perpetrator as a perpetrator, to think that there are evil people involved, to not be able to see the suffering of those who are acting in a cruel and violent and unjust ways. Now that's not Buddhist at all. It's actually contrary to what the Buddha teaches, and as far as I was able to understand it. The point is to liberate oneself from this conditioned state, reactionary state, emotional, reactionaries, obadana. Liberate yourself from that first, and then you'll see that the injustice committed by a person, it comes back. It's the suffering of that person too, at least. And it is the suffering of those who are subjected to it because of their upadana. But we're not denying that an act of injustice is hurtful, but it's hurtful only insofar as those who are subjected to it substantiate that experience. Ultimately, this is the final analysis provided by the Buddha. And then at the same time, there is a very big problem in not being able to see that an act of injustice is the suffering of the perpetrator. That's compassion. That's what compassion is. And that it has to be taken into consideration in any act of resistance or standing up against injustice. Why? Because it's going to help one not become a perpetrator in turn. And this is what we actually see in acts of resistance or fighting against social injustice. We see that those who take up that kind of cause end up being themselves prejudiced, violent, and hurtful. In the name of social justice, for sure, but still. You become similar to the perpetrator because you're unable to see their suffering. Because you have taking things personally because you have substantiated the exchange and interaction of doing and receiving. Free yourself at first, and then you will see that what the other person needs is not punishment, but also freedom. Free yourself at first, and only then will you be able to see that the other person is suffering and is behaving in a cruel and hurtful way because they are suffering, and because what they need is freedom from that suffering. This is the message of the Buddha.